Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to another enriching episode of I Am Dad podcast. Today we are honored to have Sundjata Aya, a dedicated father, community servant, and social policy public health researcher. He's joining us today. Sundjata's passion lies in improving family and health outcomes, particularly for disadvantaged communities, and promoting equity in all areas of his work. With expertise in family and fatherhood initiatives, Sundjata leads research, technical assistance, and the development of tools that empower programs to make a real difference in the lives of fathers and families. His background in community-based participatory research and public health reflects his deep commitment to reducing disparities and supporting healthier communities. Outside of his impactful professional life, he enjoys spending time with his family, working with youth, DJing, got something in common with him, and connecting with nature. We're thrilled to explore his insights and experiences today. Let's bring my brother into the space, Mr. Sundjata. How you doing, sir?
Doing very well. How are you?
I tell people all the time, it's like a spades player. I can't call it. I'm just gonna play my hand, see if my partner can keep up with me.
Oh, listen. I get that. Yeah, spades is a serious game, man. It's serious.
Yeah, it's not for the weak. It's not for the weak.
Not at all.
Listen, we start our podcast off, with a simple engagement mechanism to get people more aware of who you are and who we're talking to. And I just love the question because it gives me some insight into some of why you do what you do and why you are who you are. Tell us your daddy story.
Man, well, my daddy story starts with my own father. My parents were married, and when they got divorced, my father fought to get access to me and was systematically denied access. And I saw how that impacted him, and I know how it impacted me. I didn't really see the impact on him until much later as an adult, but I definitely felt the absence of his presence, even though he lived 10 minutes away. Despite being a police officer, respectable member of the community, he was still denied access to his son. And so, it's one of those situations where we've seen this example in our community. And I felt like there was something here. I knew there was something going on, and I wanted to figure out what it was, because I started to hear that the terms like deadbeat dad, and what I was seeing were fathers who they were raising other people's children. So, of course, it seemed like it would make sense that they would want to raise their own children. And of course, you have those fathers who don't really care, but that wasn't the majority. And so I began to really look into it. I worked in a lot of programs where I did youth work, and I would see the same pattern over and over again, where mothers were asking me to kind of be a father figure to their son, but the fathers are there wanting to be present in a lot of cases. And so I had a mentoring program, a mentoring reentry program, where that was something that happened a lot, where these young people were incarcerated. And what I began to understand is a lot of them were crying out for their fathers, right? They were crying out for their fathers. And so it just, things happened in my professional life and personal life that kept me asking the question, well, where are the fathers? What's going on? What's happening with the fathers? And then in my own personal life, never thought I would have experienced it. I also, having to fight for the right to be in my son's life. I have two children, And I have a 15-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And since my son was 4 years old, I've been having to fight to be in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And the only, we're co-parenting fine. The only thing that changed was that I got married. And at that point, I was essentially threatened with the court. And in my mind, I was like, well, I've been here, never had any issues taking care of my child, never had any issues. I'm the best father, according to, his mother up until this point. So how could the court not establish my rights? How could I not be given the right to raise my child? And man, I've been called the N-word more times than I can count. I've been racially discriminated more times than I can count. And the most dehumanizing experience I've ever been involved in has been in the family court to try to establish myself as a father for my son.
Mm. Yeah. Listen, that that narrative is commonplace. I think we all get there or get here through some journey through our own pain. I'm wondering whether or not that was the motivation to get into this work specifically. Talk a little bit about that journey. How did you land yourself specifically beginning to do research, technical assistance, and work around fatherhood?
Yeah, so as I explained, in my previous work, working with young people, I've always been involved in some type of social service type work, community development work, counseling, case management, something to benefit the community. My background is in psychology. I went to Florida A&M University. Shout out to FAMU. And, my background is in psychology. And so I always did some kind of work in terms of community programs to help improve community outcomes. And so I began to see this pattern once again, over and over and over again, with issues that the Black families that I was working with are facing and wanting to figure out solutions to those things. And I eventually came to understand that policy had a lot to do with what I was seeing. Right. And eventually, the natural progression is let's go to the root of the problem. Let's go to where we can make the most impact. And I started to see how policy was involved with separating families, was influencing families to make decisions that caused them to separate and not work together. And I wanted to figure out how to make changes that could, provide a better circumstance for the children, in those families. So in my personal journey, I began I went to Morehouse School of Medicine, got my master's in public health so I could understand how the research works. The technical aspects of research. I chose Morehouse because of their community-based participatory foundation. They're one of the schools or institutions that really promoted this idea of community-based participatory research, which is about active engagement and engaging the community. It's about equity in research. And so that's my foundation in research, that equity piece. And applying that equity, I began to see where that equity was missing in the research space. And then in my own journey, I realized that fighting the oppression that I was feeling as a father, that I was experiencing as a father, was a part of what helped me in my healing journey to maintain health and balance, that I couldn't just sit there and not do anything, because if I was having this struggle, imagine the fathers with less resources that are also having this struggle. How can I help to make this issue better for fathers and children and for families? And what I found as I began this journey is that when fathers are involved, mothers do better, the children do better, and the fathers do better, right? So all the things that I was seeing in the community, I knew that this was a piece that I had a personal story that could help to make sure that people understood what's going on here, but I also could see this as a solution across the board in terms of policy and otherwise.
Yeah, it's crazy, man, because when I first met you, I remember us somewhere we were, And you said, "Hey, man, I'm part of your program." And I'm looking at you, and I was like, "I know this cat. It's like this dude is a researcher." And you kept, I could never. It took me a minute to wrap my head around you. Like my mind was saying, "I hear you," but it wasn't resonating. And you kept saying, "Yo, I was in your program." And then one day I was talking to Javin, and I said, "Yo, Sundjata said he was part of our program. He's part of." He was like, "Yeah." He's like, "He did. You didn't know he did." I'm like, I said, "Yeah, the brother." I was like, "He keeps telling me, but my mind won't wrap around. I know this cat. This dude is in the. He's
Yeah,
in the he's in the battle. He's on the struggle field." And
yeah,
finally, when I got my head around it, I was like, "This is a special dude." I was like, "This is a special dude," and I said, "And I really got to figure out how to be more connected to you, and how we can begin, to activate, our superpowers so that we can figure out how to understand this thing." Because I think that part of what I've learned to understand in the last 20 years, Sanjata, is that I liken this work to a bundle of Christmas lights in the box for the last 5 years, and you pull it out and everybody wants us plugged in. Everybody wants to see the lights, but no one wants to put the work into untangling the light so you can actually use it and it can be what it can be. And
absolutely.
so, talk to me just a little bit before we move forward into the work. Like, what was the driver for you to like begin to say to yourself, "I need something else. Like, I'm smart, I'm intelligent, I know this work, I know the system, I know the problem, I know the issue, I know all of this stuff, but I still need something to help me get over the hump so I can get back to my children."
Yeah, I think that so there are two levels to that, right? One is the personal psychological impact that being separated and alienated from your children has on a father, right?
Mhm.
I was experiencing that even today, 4 years into my journey. There are 265 days out of the year where I don't know where my son is. I can't contact him. I can't talk to him. I've
Mm.
never had any issues with domestic violence. I don't have any criminal record. I've been nothing but an exemplary father. Never had any issues paying child support. So all of the excuses or reasons why you hear that fathers are separated from their children, they don't apply. So
Mm.
something else has to be going on. And I realized that my whole reality was being denied. And that
Mhm.
can have some mental health impacts, right? You have to do something very intentionally to help maintain balance and health when you're being gaslit, when you're being your whole experience in existence is being denied. So I sought out a brotherhood, and that's how I got to. That's what I wanted in Fathers Incorporated. When I talked to Javin, I was working with a community program called Gangsters to Growers, working with some young
Mhm.
folks who had some justice or legal involvement, and because I think justice and legal involvement are very different and distinct, right?
Mhm.
I don't know that they were experiencing justice, but they had some legal involvement, and we were using agriculture and entrepreneurship to help get them plugged back into the community. So um, Fathers Incorporated and Gangsters Growers is in the same space. Met Javin, and he started to talk about the work that you do. And even though I'd already started the process of getting legitimated in my child's life, I knew that that brotherhood would make a big difference for me because I
Mm.
saw how isolated brothers in the community have been with dealing with this issue. And remember, I've been working in social service for a while. So when I'm working with people who are unhoused, one of the biggest things that the men complained about that maybe caused their psychological break or caused them to drop out of society was being separated from their children.
Right.
Right. I saw men who were making good money, had put $100,000 into their their case to fight for their child, still being denied their rights and the mental impact that it had on them. And I was in fact telling Javin about Rajai Black, who was a man who was in Baltimore area who had an issue similar to mine, and he ended up committing a murder suicide on Facebook Live. And I was
Mm.
explaining to him, like, look, man, we have to take care of our mental health.
Mhm.
We cannot become the monsters that this system wants us to be. We have to figure out how we're going to take care of our health so we can continue in this battle. because our children need us. Our families need us. Our communities need us. We can't allow this to destroy us. And so when he started telling me about Fathers Incorporated, I was like, man, I need that. I need to get in that brotherhood. And I was, talking to him also from the perspective of, let me see what y'all got going on. Maybe I can give you some pointers and advice and so on and so forth in terms of my research background. But it turned out to be much more than that, and more beneficial for me than I even anticipated. Yeah.
Man, I appreciate you, bro. We got a lot of work to do together. Now that my head is wrapped around you, I was like, "Oh, this is a resource. We could do some damage. We can make some things happen."
Right.
In your work, particularly in this space of research, I talk to a lot of researchers, about a lot of different things,
Mhm.
and I know that there isn't enough research done on enough things to give us a full picture, of what's taking place.
Mm.
But what frustrates you about research, particularly as it relates to fatherhood?
Man, there's several things. Um, One is how research is done on its own, right? There's this veil of objectivity that you're expected to have. You're expected to have a veil of objectivity where you don't apply yourself to the research, right? The authenticity is not there. You're not able to. You're supposed to act like you're separate from whatever you're studying,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
I know for a fact that whoever the researcher is, they are also bringing a part of themselves to that research. And so, one of the things that I like about how I approach research is, we look at what do we bring to the table, and we account for that, check that, and that authenticity is a part of what I think gets better research. So my little tagline about it is me search before research. Check
mhm,
yourself, do a accountability assessment so that you can really apply what you need to apply, and get the best quality out of research. In order to elevate voices of those who are experiencing oppression, experiencing challenges, you need to check your own voice,
mhm,
right? And so that's a part of that's one side of it. But in terms of the other aspects that relate specifically to Black fathers, what I'm seeing is that we absolutely are fighting against white supremacy.
mhm,
And I think that many people are in denial about the role that white supremacy has in this issue. We essentially have history that goes back to enslavement, where and beyond, where white supremacy has been impacting Black families. And if you want to see the impact on Black families and how and what would happen if we had limited interaction with white supremacy, you can look at Reconstruction. So
mhm,
just after enslavement, right, you have Reconstruction, a period of time when the country was trying to reorganize itself after the Civil War, and this period is when you have Black families coming together, right? You have more marriages in Black families than any other time in history. You have more schools being built, right? Communities being built, Black folks being involved in politics. You see the strength of the Black family coming out after a period of hundreds of years where they weren't even able to marry legally.
mhm,
You have Black fathers who are walking thousands of miles to reconnect their families, to find their children. They're walking through hostile territories, walking through states where they could be lynched. You understand? They're walking through these territories thousands of miles to find their wives, find their children, piece their families back together.
mhm,
So how do we go from that to deadbeat dad? Right?
mhm,
Like there are these stories in dog whistle politics that are being told separate from the history that don't allow us to really see what has really happened and what we need to do. And so if we look at enslavement and its connection to the laws that we have currently, we see that children are monetized during enslavement, right? They're monetized. And so the laws were legally changed to encourage an industry of domestic slavery where the status of the child was determined by the status of the mother or the race of the mother.
mhm,
So essentially, a white slave owner would have more property if he created life with a Black woman, and he wouldn't have to share, his descendants wouldn't have to share the wealth if the woman was black, right?
Right.
But if the woman that he had a child with was white, that would be another heir to his legacy,
Right.
right? So to this day, in terms of policy, we have a situation where the government is looking to also quantify or they're looking to monetize children in the sense that to cover the cost of providing safety net programs to families who need that support. They're depending on fathers with child support to bear that cost. And so I think there are a lot
Mm.
of things in terms to just get back to your question. There are a lot of things that people are not willing to really address. They're not willing to go back to the history and work their way forward to see how the history has impacted us and what needs to change.
Yeah, and it's crazy because part of what you were just talking about with respect to, the child being attached to mothers and increasing the property value of the slave owner is literally where the legitimation laws in Georgia are baked in. Because while that was a benefit, the thing that they had to guard against was those illegitimate children coming after their inheritances once they prove paternity. And
Right.
so that's why the legitimation process in the state of Georgia is in superior court, not in family court, because
Mm.
what you're talking about is property. So the legitimation laws are closely tied to what you're talking about with respect to increasing slave owners' value by having children connected to the mom, right?
Mm.
And but the problem was that these children later on in life were beginning to establish paternity and coming after the estate for inheritances.
Right.
And so that legitimation law was put in place to stop that from happening. And literally, that's where we are today with legitimation. Now
Yeah.
it has always been a family issue, but they made it a property issue. And because it's a property issue, it is now impacting how families, particularly non married families, and it gave slave owners, business people, and other people the ability to have what was described back in the day illegitimate children and not have to worry about those children coming after their inheritances.
Right.
And so it's crazy when you talk about research and how how we have to go back and uncover the story and elevate the story, right? And so I always tell people when it comes to this work that we often, and I hear even folks in our space will use the term, we have to change the narrative. My assertion is that no, we don't have to change the narrative. We have to expose the narrative. The narrative has always been there. We
Hmm.
need to uncover it and expose it for the truth that it is.
Right.
Do you think that research is the only way and the only mechanism to uncover like the truth, or are there other ways to tell our stories to get people to humanize the work?
Yeah, I think that's therein lies the answer, right? Like in the
Mhm.
question, you have the answer in terms of humanizing the work. I think that that's a part of the whole idea of objectivity that's insane. Is that we're talking about studying people and what's going on with people. And the only way to get good quality work is to humanize the work. We can't separate, um, the human impact and what's going on from the numbers, right? We need to actually humanize those numbers and understand how those numbers affect human beings. And so, yeah, like we have to have people who can tell their own story. Like in this fatherhood space, most of the people who are researching fatherhood they're not fathers. They're not fathers.
Right.
Now, not to take anything away from the amazing women who are in the space. We got women like Dr. Latrice Rawlins and Dr. Craig Coupe and some other folks who they really care about what's going on with fathers, and they're great allies. So we can identify that this is not an issue against men against women, right? Because we have strong women who are also here. But in order to get real impact in this space, we need to empower fathers to be able to tell their own stories. We
Hmm.
need to empower fathers to be able to do the research. We need to empower fathers to be able to advocate in a way that that can increase their sense of agency. That in
Mm.
of itself is healing, but it also allows for policymakers to see the impact. Like when I'm standing in front of a room of healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood programs that are funded by, these federal funds, there are hundreds of programs, and I can say to you, programs that look, I represent your clients, and I'm a researcher in this space, and I'm still fighting to be in the life of my child.
Right.
Um, I'm still being told that I need to be a responsible father.
Right.
Like, no, I've been a responsible father even before I was a father, because I was a community father for children who didn't have fathers in place.
Right.
I've always been there in the lives of my children.
Mm-hmm.
Never, if allowed, unless I was prevented, like I'm being prevented from being in the life of my son now actively, and I'm fighting for that right. I've been there. So I don't need to be taught how to be responsible. What I need is support to overcome the racism in these policies, the
Right.
bias in these policies that limit my human right and limit my son's human right to have access to his father.
Yeah. Some of the work also has to be in, there's a lot of conversation now around gender equity. And gender equity has taken on this connotation that it only means bringing equity to women, right? That for some odd reason, there's no equity that needs to be given to men, right? Which is totally untrue.
Right.
And the conversation has to be elevated so that, to your point about understanding that there are great women who are out there on the battlefield for fathers. And I believe that many of those women who are out there that are entrenched in this work do it because they have humanized this conversation. They've humanized it through their own experiences, either with their own fathers or the fathers of their children. So they understand what it looks like, and they understand how it hurts, when you use selfishness as your reasoning, for separating, fathers from their children. And so there needs to be a conversation, that takes place. Like you use the term ally. I personally do not like the term ally, because I think ally means that I can take on and support your cause without you taking on my cause. Partners mean that we equally share in the concern for each of our causes, right? So anytime that someone says, I need you to be an ally, nah, I ain't got time to be your ally. I got my own things I'm working with. We can be a partner, and in our partnership, I can support you and you can support me, and we can get much further in doing that. How much do we have to bring the community into this conversation, specifically into research? Because a lot oftentimes, you just said earlier that most of the researchers out there, A, are not fathers, and B, don't look like us. And so, how do we bring the community deeper into the research space?
And that's a part of what I work on in some of my projects now. My fatherhood work in particular, in Reframe, which is about elevating Black voices. It's kind of a very innovative project for federal funders to fund a project that's all about elevating Black voices to get better programs, right? So that's my specialty in research right now, is the active engagement, the elevating those voices with lived expertise, the voices with wisdom from doing work in this space who've been working with Black families, um, and getting that wisdom uplifted so that we can get better policy. One of the things that we're doing as well is trying to encourage um, fathers to get the research background and experience that they need so they can understand and participate at a higher level with the research, and encouraging fathers to participate in the research and be at these tables. So in this space, there's someone who opened up the space for me, Dr. Bright Sarfo. He's no longer with us, um, but he's a great example of what we need in the space. We need people who can be gateways, not gatekeepers, who can
Mm.
open up the way for fathers to come into spaces like this and shake things up and tell their story so that we're not having this diplomatic, polite kind of discourse while people are suffering and rights are being denied.
Right.
Where we're, you're not making decisions about me without me.
Right.
We're here at the table, and I can tell you for a fact that this is not about domestic violence. This is not about being a deadbeat dad. This is not about man versus woman. This is about the health of the whole family, and I deserve to have the right to be here to help ensure the health of my family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can't deny me because I'm here and I'm telling you my story,
Right.
right? I think it's easy. Researchers a lot of times are separated from what's happening on the ground with families. And so the more we get that connection where families and people who are recipients of these programs, who are suffering some of these injustices, to communicate with those researchers, to communicate with policymakers, the more chance we have of getting better policy. And then also fighting is winning, right?
Wow.
So the more we can do to fight for what we know is right, the more healing that is. We can heal some of the impacts of this systemic oppression that is at the root of what's going on with Black families right now.
Yeah, I also believe that there's some going back that we have to do in the academic space
True.
within the development of individuals that are getting into this work, whether it is research or school of social work, right? Because social workers are still coming through the pipeline and they get into professional careers and having never had a conversation about men and fatherhood in their training, right? They're getting trained on the other side. They're not
Right.
coming through the system understanding that there's a whole body of work around serving and providing services for men. How can research inform that space so that we can begin to take that step back into spaces so that we are clear or that others are clear when they are training our researchers and our social workers around family, that the term family includes fathers?
Yeah, that's a great point. A part of the issue is, we have become accustomed to not caring about fathers. And we have there's a political dynamic, right? And we talked about Reconstruction. The thing that ended Reconstruction was political violence, economic violence, and physical violence. That's when the KKK was formed, right? And so we've got to really address the political and social dynamics with how fathers are seen. When we talk about political violence, dog whistle politics, where folks use terms like deadbeat dad to push funding and they're basically talking about Black fathers,
Right.
right? I coined a term called mela misandry. Misandry is the hate for men. Mela is the melanin aspect of that. So there's a hate for Black fathers that exists. There's a fear of and hate for Black fathers. And we've got to address this bias, address this hate, that would allow for Black fathers to be systematically separated from their families. And I think the attack on the Black family is very intentional by some. And if we're going to really start to get training that really meets the needs of our people and what's going on, we need to address this history, to your point. We need to reverse the political violence, the economic violence, and the physical violence that affects Black families. And so going back and having studies where you look at the history, what happened, how did we get to where Black fathers are not as supported in being a part of the family? How have these policies impacted families, right? And so we have a report coming out in the Reframe Project that I mentioned earlier that goes into some of this history. So we need research that prioritizes identifying how Black fathers, children, mothers, the whole family has been impacted by policy, impacted by the social dynamics in terms of how we see fathers and their role, so that we can start to, study these things. But there are gaps in the research. And so there's certain things that we also need to help build an understanding That's how research is done. You use previous research to build an understanding of what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just not enough research out there specifically focused on fathers. So we
Mm-hmm.
need to, promote that this research needs to be done and that this focal area is important. Fathers are important.
Yeah, one of the areas that I wanted to get in, which is why I created the Monahan Institute, was to begin to pull together researchers of like mind and like experiences to come together and do research, right?
Right.
And be a think tank, particularly for Black issues. In my space, more Black fathers, but Black families in particular as they relate to Black fathers. And sometimes that's very difficult, particularly when researchers are on their academic track and they're trying to get tenure in their non-institutional schools, right?
Right.
Because that's the work. But being able to gather, Black researchers, which I'd been combing to find out whether or not there are conferences that take place around the country where Black researchers gather with respect to family, and are there conversations going back and forth?
Mhm.
Is there active recruitment in trying to make sure that both brothers and sisters probably more now than brothers do, go into the space of research and go into the space of social work? And how do we change and impact the disparity of numbers with respect to Black men being in human service spaces? And how do we
Right.
equalize those numbers and make that happen? And addressing this whole issue of cancel culture, meaning every time we say something,
Mhm.
you got to assume that we're trying to say something. No, listen to what I'm saying and stop trying to hear what you think I'm saying, so that
Right.
we can get to the point. There's a gentleman on LinkedIn now, Ludo Gabriel. Been him and Richard Reeves from the Boys Institute been posting a lot of things lately about gender equity. Really, some great stuff. At some point, I'm trying to get both of them on the podcast.
Yeah.
But Ludo was responding to somebody in his post the other day, and the guy was just questioning, again, agitating, right? But his response, and I messaged him yesterday and I said, man, bro, that line that you put in response to him was the best line I think I've ever read on LinkedIn. And it
Hmm.
speaks to this. His response to the guy's comment was, with such a sensitive subject, everything matters. How you say it and when you say it matters as much, maybe more than the message itself, if you want it to land effectively. I was like, yo, that's that's the challenge you and I have in
Hmm.
this space, especially when it comes to Black fathers. Like, because when we start talking, everybody go, oh, here they go again, talking about Black fathers. Here they go. It's like, what about moms? What about this? It's like, stop bringing me what abouts. Like,
Right.
let's I got to deal with your issues when you bring them to me. You have to
Right.
deal with my issues when you bring it to me as well. How how do we become more comfortable in being unapologetic about speaking specifically to issues as it relates to Black fathers?
Yeah. That man, that relates. One, to your point about being an ally versus being a partner. I love that. I'm going to start using the term partner
Mm,
because what you say makes complete sense in terms of that. I'm going to use it more. So, in terms of this issue with like Black Fathers Matter, for example, just like with the Black Lives Matter movement, you had people trying to take away the point of the message by saying, well, blue lives matter and white lives matter and all these other lives matter, which is beside the point of the fact that Black lives are systematically devalued
mm,
more than these other lives. And it's important to call attention to that and address that. In the same way, Black Fathers Matter has also received similar responses. And that's why you see me wearing the shirt. We have to be unapologetic. And a part of that is being grounded in our message. A lot of times, fathers are socialized into thinking that our only role or purpose is to serve everybody else.
Mm.
And so we see that in the fatherhood space, where the only way that we can get legislation to address fatherhood issues is because now we're seeing maternal and child health issues.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
because we have mothers dying more, and the research says that fathers being involved helps to improve those outcomes for mothers, now it matters that fathers matter. So we have, we got to begin somewhere. And so we have a policy coming out now called Dads Matter 2024, but it's around maternal and child health specifically. And while maternal and child health is a very serious issue that we obviously would support, we also need to address that there's this pattern of only caring about fathers because the
Right.
missing father negatively impacts someone else in their health outcomes. But we
Right.
got fathers going crazy, becoming unhoused and homeless, falling out of the system,
Mm-hmm.
becoming incarcerated. And the mental health impact of the systemic separation of fathers from their families and alienation of fathers from their children is a very deep need that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
So fathers getting out there, becoming active in any fatherhood organization that is doing some good work. Fathers Incorporated is doing some great work. Get out here, join a movement, and start to do work. I'm doing work double time, bro. Like I'm doing this research stuff, but I'm also a part of several fatherhood organizations trying to move the needle forward, because we know that when the father is healthy, everybody else is more healthy too. But
Right.
we need to change the narrative where the father only matters, not because they're human beings, but because of their impact on someone else by not being there.
Yeah. Dr. David Miller has always been in my ear for like the last 15 years or so. I've known him, maybe 20 now. Man, you got to write. You got to write. You got to write. You got to write. And that's not just research. That's books. That's articles. That's blogs. That's op-ed pieces. I've begun to start thinking more and more about that. I literally just had an op-ed piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution around why all Black dads need to vote. And not to dismiss them for only wanting Black men to vote. But if Black men are going to vote, their issues need to be addressed as well. Yes, nostalgia and tradition is important. History is important, but not at the expense of you not hearing and adhering to my issues, our issues. And it seems like no one wants to specifically address issues as it relates to Black men unless it's around criminal justice, right? And then that, again, doesn't become about us. It becomes about something else. And so there's these conversations
Right.
and there's these writings where we have to put these brilliant minds of brothers and sisters around the country that are writing, specifically about Black men, but men in general, talking about men's issues. Dr. Gary Barker in Equimundo is doing some great stuff and putting out reports on the state of fathers and the state of male caretakers. There's an emerging conversation in the kinship space right now around father engagement. Education is now talking about fatherhood engagement in schools. SAMHSA is talking about mental health. DOJ is talking about juvenile justice. And so
Right.
there are these emerging spaces that are beginning to have conversations about fathers. How concerned should we be about the culture of where those conversations are taking place as it relates to the content?
Man, listen, who is at the table really does matter. You know, we talked about enslavement earlier. During the enslavement times, there was a term called droptomania. It was a mental health diagnosis that was officially scientifically proven that there was a mental health issue with those enslaved people or captive people trying to get freedom. That was a
Mm,
mental health issue, right? So science was used by racists to prove what they wanted it to prove. And so if we want to get more equitable research, we need people at the table who are interested in equity, but also skilled at equity. There's some specific skills that are important to get more equitable data out of research so that we can really inform the space with what's going on. So the difference with, for example, a father, we're testing an intervention in one of our programs, one of our research projects, where, matter of fact, with Fathers Incorporated, where we're looking at system navigation, how to help individually help fathers navigate some of these systems. And if we don't apply the equity lens, we could get very different outcomes. Right. On one hand, we could look at fathers who are scared of participating in the system because they see the system as hostile. We could interpret that as more of the same, deadbeat dads not wanting to do what they need to do for their children. Or we could address the very legitimate fear or concern that those fathers have and tell that story. Right? They've seen father after father go through this meat grinder of a system and pay money. Those who pay money still get the same outcome in a lot of cases where they don't have enough access to their child, or they're being violated in terms of the amount or how child support is interfacing with them and their family, right? They're being penalized for claiming that they're deadbeats when they're really just dead broke and need support, right? They're concerned about interfacing with a system that won't understand their context or give the support that they need to really do what they already want to do, which is be a father to their children, right? So we have to have people at the table who are willing to apply that equity lens, once again, self-assess, understand what biases they bring to the table, so they could check for those and account for those as they do this research. Me-search before research.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. Sundjata, tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing.
So I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Sundjata Aya, Sundjata, last name Aya. And, I'm also, you can contact me via email, sundjata.aya@gmail.com. That would be another way as well. So my first name dot last name @gmail.com.
Yeah, and as the young folks say, Google him.
Right.
He'll show up. He'll show up all over the place. Man, thank you so much. I appreciate you, bro. Got to have you back. Got to deepen this conversation a little more. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your brilliance and everything that you bring to this conversation, and your transparency, which is always key. And to my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us again. You know how I like to leave you: always be kind to others as your kind of self, and you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And that's my good friend and mentor used to always say to me: it's nice to be important, but it's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad Podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.